everybody. Happy time of day. And welcome to the one, probably the only episode of House of Tudor Dragons. I'm Jess. Apologies for the captions being kind of funky right now. They are, I did not leave a space for them on the layout because I'm used to the widget working, and there is no more widget. So this is what we have. But yeah, I'm Jess, pronouns she, her, you know the drill. And I'm so excited to introduce my guests. Let's start with Christiana. Tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Christiana or Chris. I'm a TTRPG writer, actual play performer, recently a podcaster, and just all around nerd. There really isn't a topic that I'm not willing to discuss. And when Jess mentioned us on Twitter about how there are just lines and parallels between the Tudors and House of the Dragon, I was like, you know what, fine, I'll watch it, because I wasn't really planning to watch it anyway. And the whole time I'm sitting here like, no way. So yeah, that's me. You can find me at Carpe Christie on all the socials, and I'm really excited.
All right. And Craig, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Craig Campbell. I'm the owner of Nerdburger Games, game designer and publisher. I occasionally appear on actual plays and other podcasts and streams and things. I was also suckered into doing this by Jess talking about Tudor connections to House of the Dragon, and I was like, I know the Tudors. I've watched the Tudors a bunch. I've studied the history a little bit. I've performed at the Bristol Renaissance Fair, which is steeped in Elizabethan, the Elizabethan era. So Elizabeth Tudor, Elizabeth the First, and I was like, I know like a bunch of stuff there, so I'd love to talk about this too. And now here I am, and not sure if I'm going to have a lot to say, but we'll give it a shot. But I'm at Nerdburger Craig on Twitter, and you can find all the other links in my pinned tweet.
Heck yeah. Well, let's just start by, how's everybody liking the show so far? If you have not seen House of the Dragons, it's the Game of Thrones spinoff. It's based on Fire and Blood, which was itself based on the Rogue Prince and the Prince and the Queen, Princess and the Queen, my bad, and a couple other short stories that were compiled into Fire and Blood. But yeah, it takes place hundreds of years before Game of Thrones. A Song of Ice and Fire took place.
200-ish years, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And it's all about those sexy, incestuous Targaryens. Content warning, incest for this stream. And also probably content warning spoilers for, like, history?
Yeah.
But yeah, how's everybody feeling about the show?
I personally, I like a lot of elements of it. There are some plot points that I'm like, okay, how many times are they going to be like, she's a woman, she can't be queen, like find a better reason. But
a lot. They're going to hit that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if that needs to be the plot, whatever, it'll just feel good when she burns you all with her dragons. But I am loving the character development. I really, really love the relationship between Alicent and Rhaenyra. I just, when the two of them are on screen, like that's when I'm most engaged. So I hope to see more of that. As in the most recent episode, it seems like some of the tension between them was starting to dissipate. So we'll see.
I love what they've done with their relationship in the show, because in the books, if you haven't read the books, Alicent is older and Rhaenyra is younger. There's like a 9-year difference between them, I think. So they've smushed them in the middle and made this friendship, crush, potential star-crossed romance going on between them. And I'm loving it so much. It makes Alicent a lot more sympathetic.
See, I like that you gave me that, because I've never read any of the books, full disclosure to anyone watching.
I've read all the books multiple times because I'm that person.
Well, I'm glad, but it's funny because like the first episode when they're kids or just younger teenagers, I was like, gay? I wasn't sure though, because I'm like, they're kids. Like, maybe it's just a really great friendship. That's fine. I hold some of my female friends' hands too.
Yeah.
That's fine. But I'm glad that you said what you said.
I do too, but I'm also bisexual and wasn't aware of that when I was younger. So I was like, yeah, all my friends are the prettiest. You know how you like play with your friend's hair and like cuddle your friends and kiss your friends? Like, that's what you do.
I was wondering if it was just me because I'm the straight guy and I'm like, is this like, are they going to kiss? Like,
right?
Is this like, is there a relationship there, or is this just straight guy coming out thinking about that?
Okay, good. I'm glad we're all like trying to get them to kiss.
Yeah.
But and I think that's all purposeful because even if it's not a relationship that comes to any sort of fruition in that way, there's the hint of it being there, and there's a bond that's there that's stronger, that maybe goes beyond just like we're friends, especially once there's the power disparity between the two of them. Once Alicent is the queen, that puts her in a position where she, she holds a lot of power over Rhaenyra if she really wants to. They could play up that struggle and play off of that. And
what a change for their dynamic too.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like with the time jumps, like that's one of the criticisms that we saw in Game of Thrones was there was early seasons where things seemed to really be slow, kind of slow build, kind of get to things very slowly, a lot of character development, a lot of plot movement, stretched out over time, and then everything got very, very quick at the end, and they kind of compacted a lot of stuff. Whereas this one, they're doing things quickly, but they're also like, it's like, here, this happens now, and now a year later this happens, and 2 years later this happens. So there's like these major plot developments that take place from one episode to the next, but there's time that has passed, so you can fill in the gaps and figure out, well, why is Daemon acting the way he is? Well, like, what is the relationship between him and his brother? And the fact that like we learn that it has the rift between them has grown over the course of all this time. And so, yeah, it's like it's like they're hitting the best of, like there's a whole story here and there's all this little nuance and everything, but we're going to kind of roll to the major points as quickly as possible and just explain some of the nuance, kind of as exposition to set you up.
Yeah, I keep thinking with how fast they're doing these time skips, because I think the part of like the first 4 episodes that we've seen now, I think are like 2 pages in Fire and Blood.
Right.
And we're going to be getting like 7 chapters of Fire and Blood total, I think. I'm not sure. Feel free to yell at me about that for getting it wrong on Twitter. But I know which year this is planning on ending in this season. I think it's 170, but it ends with a major event, and I don't want to spoil that. So, but I totally lost my train of thought with that. Oh, yeah. One of the biggest issues in A Song of Ice and Fire is that, for me, is that George R.R. Martin started, he wanted like a 5-year split break, and then decided not to do it. And now he's stuck with like what to do for these 5 years. And Fire and Blood is like, oh yeah, this happened, and then 5 years later this happened, and then 10 years later this happened. And I feel like watching the show is like night and day from the other one, where it's like not in the later seasons of Game of Thrones where like everybody got a teleporter, but in this one, like that 3-year skip, I was listening to Boars, Gore, and Swords podcast that's reviewing it, and they thought the baby in the second episode, or the baby in the 4th episode that Alicent's holding, was the same baby from the previous episode, because that's how old Sam's baby stayed the same time the whole time in Game of Thrones. And they're like, is that the same baby? Because baby Sam was like 3 or 4 and was that size. I have no idea what a baby looks like. Everybody was like, no, this is a new baby.
Yeah, honestly, it took me a second. I had to literally like look at the actress and be like, does she still have a bump?
Right.
Okay, no. All right.
Yeah, and based on how it's shot, you never know. Like you could spend half an episode without really getting a good look at her belly, where it's just shots from the side or from the back or from the from the waist up, where you just don't see anything. There's a little bit of that where you kind of have to every time, because every time there's a time jump, you have to kind of reacclimate yourself. You have to be like, okay, so this amount of time has passed. This is what was happening before, and it's become this. And some of it they explain what happens in between, and some of it you're just kind of left to extrapolate. Well, why did we get from point A to point B?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why I saw the Tudors a lot of this. I know George R. Martin said it's based on the Anarchy. But after the first episode, and this will contain spoilers for up through episode 4. So if you are interested in watching this and don't want to be spoiled, bye. There's a scene where after Queen Emma dies, Otto tells Allison, who's 15 at the time, he's like, go comfort the queen, go comfort the king, and wear your dead mother's dress. And I saw so many people on Twitter who were like, what kind of father would do that? That's disgusting. That's horrible. And I was like...
Nobody would ever do that.
Right? No one would do that. No father would do that to their daughter. And I was like, let me tell you about a man named Thomas Boleyn.
Who did it to
twice.
Daughters. Twice. Oh, man. And they both died.
Wasn't it?
Because of his actions.
Was it Thomas Boleyn or Thomas Seymour who also introduced Catherine Howard as well? Because I know she was their cousin.
That's a good question. There's so many Thomases.
Because there's Thomas Boleyn and Thomas Seymour. And I know Thomas Seymour was like, have my sister, Jane Seymour. And he was also the one who was who married Catherine Parr and then was trying to hit on Elizabeth and was very inappropriate with a very young Elizabeth. But I don't remember if it was him who was like, have this 15-year-old Catherine Howard, or if that was Thomas Boleyn.
Yeah, Thomas and Jane were brother and sister, and so it's very likely that.
Oh, hey, our client, thanks for the sub.
He was probably like, hey, why don't you check out, my sister's single.
Yeah.
I got this move from Thomas Boleyn, by the way.
Yeah, because I know Anne Boleyn and her brother both did not make it, but their dad somehow weaseled his way around and stayed for a little bit. So I wouldn't have been surprised if he was like, so Anne has a cousin, her name is Catherine, and she's younger than Anne was.
So
I think that's pretty much what happened.
Yeah.
the background for those who are wondering what exactly the deal is with Thomas Boleyn and his daughters.
Oh, okay, yeah. Who would Christiana, you were talking so much about how this was reminding you of the Tudors. Would you like to tell us about Thomas Boleyn?
Oh, sure. I mean, my expertise is not so much on Thomas specifically.
What? You didn't go to school for Thomas Boleyn? Thomas Boleyn Academy?
But mostly because history kind of, and their history is often wrong, but kind of writes him as a blumbering lucky man who had daughters who were a lot smarter than him, and he knew what he wanted. He didn't know how to achieve that, and it was the outside influence of daughters, of sometimes the king, and just other members of the papacy who would say things, and he'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I need to go do this and put this pawn here. And usually it was Anne until she eventually became the queen.
Yeah.
But he wasn't that smart, so I kind of put him to the side. But I mean, there were so many things in this show, especially right before the whole big popular story of King Henry VIII was the War of the Roses. And I thought it was super interesting. It's probably not a direct parallel, but because I was watching this, thinking about the Tudors, the War of the Roses ended when the two houses married each other, when Henry married Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
Very much like one of Viserys's advisors was just like, go marry the Valyrian girl or whatever her name is,
Oh, Lena
Lyanna,
Valerian.
because yeah. So then, the two houses can be united and you'll be really strong. And that's exactly what happened in England.
Mm-hmm.
And they did have one of the longest reigning houses in England. I think
Yeah.
the longest were the Tudors. I don't remember exactly how long
Yeah,
it
the
was,
Tudors
but
and then the Stuarts.
yeah. And the Stuarts were in Scotland as well. So
Mm.
it's just like a dynasty, really, in the UK. But I thought that was really interesting and I really liked that. And I didn't think it was a good idea for a little girl to get married. I hated that scene. I hated everything about it, but it was a little consoling to see that he was as disgusted with it as I think probably all the viewers were, except for the creepy ones.
Yeah, I
Um,
did like that both of them seemed to hate being on that date as much as we all hated watching it.
yeah, yeah.
But
It's
he is
like
like, "Oh, you're a child." And she's like, "Oh my god, tell me about your nuclear arsenal."
it was like, oh, I just knowing that her parents coached her probably in what to say.
Yeah.
I can't, I don't really intend on being a parent, but I could not. I love power. I don't know if I like it that much.
Well, it is interesting because it has happened more times than I'm sure we can count
Oh,
historically,
yeah.
where one family has arranged the marriage of a very young child to an equally young or sometimes much older child or even an adult
Mm-hmm.
to all in the names of political power and deal making and sometimes when like you know, something like that might be more likely to go through if the the family with the young child has any real significant power or something that the other family really really wants. Where like it's Lena,
Yeah.
right? Like
Lena
she
and
was
Laenor.
like she was yeah she was offered up as a potential match, and it will quote unquote strengthen. But there's like, oh, so it's like it's two Targaryen families, and it's going to be like, you know, it'll be a strong match because it's just bringing those two families together. But we don't really know why that family was really that important, other than they were like, oh, they're also an old family.
Mhm.
Um, if it might have seemed more interesting if they had actually given us more concrete information about why that would really benefit the king, other than to just have a wife.
So I can tell you that information if you want, because
No,
I
no, and
knew.
that's okay. And it may not be. I'm sure the detail is there with Martin because that's how he writes. But I don't know that that moment's kind of past in the story, so I don't know that it's really going to become pertinent. But again, this is one of those situations where they, and they may very well have filmed something and just decided to cut it, and they want to keep the story moving for these first handful of episodes where they're doing all these time jumps, so they're not dwelling on extraneous stuff like that that might have fleshed that scene out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Was it something about his like naval forces, like Corlin's force, like that would have strengthened them or whatever?
So
But
the
clearly, he didn't think that was
Targaryens
that
are
interesting and useful. But
so it's that they're the wealthiest house. They have the ships, but the biggest and most important thing for him is that they're dragon riders.
Right.
They have three
Okay.
dragons, and right now he has one dragon rider in his family.
Mm-hmm.
So marrying them just makes sense. When they came over from Valeria, their house Valerian, the Valerians had the ships that the Targaryens brought all their stuff over on. So they're like, oh, we'll marry each other, but if we have to marry someone else, it should be a Valerian because they also have the white hair and the magic blood. So that's why Rhaenys, the queen who never was,
Mm-hmm.
is married to Corlys Valerian, and she's a dragon rider, and her children are dragon riders as well, which is why Lena was like, tell me about your nukes. Tell me about your dragons. Tell me about the biggest dragon alive. And why did you lose that?
And all of that was kind of dismissed out of hand very quickly by our good king for
King
reasons.
Smart Brain.
King Smart Brain. We didn't get to see like the Boleyn thing play out fully with Alicent because there's just the one daughter, and we went right into Alicent marrying the king, whereas with
Thomas
with the Boleyns, Thomas, like you said, Thomas didn't really know what to do, but he had very smart daughters, and Mary, I believe, is the elder of the daughters. And this was during the period, for reference for people who maybe aren't familiar with the history, this is during the period when it's like during or just after Henry Tudor, Henry VIII, has broken from the Catholic Church, formed the Church of England, installed himself as the head of the church, and given himself a divorce from his first wife because the Pope wouldn't do it, an annulment, which means it never happened, so that he is free to marry another, because he had not had a good relationship with Catherine of Aragon for a very long time.
Even though they were very much in love when they were younger.
Early, and even though it's an incredibly useful political marriage because Catherine is the sister, I believe, of Philip of Spain, the king, or prince at the time, but king eventually.
And I think the niece to the Pope at the time as well.
Yeah, like they're really connected. But she, and here's again where we get into that whole man-woman thing, she only produced a daughter. That's Mary, who becomes Mary Tudor, and is
Bloody
queen
Mary.
very briefly.
Bloody Mary.
Becomes known as Bloody Mary, right. And that's different from Mary Queen of Scots, just to cover that.
Oh, yeah. Mary Queen of Scots,
that's a different Mary.
Queen. Absolute queen. Bloody Mary.
So Henry's in desperate need of a new wife. He wants to have a wife, so that, and hopefully she'll bear a son for him, because he wants desperately to have a son. And he first has an affair with Mary Boleyn.
He had an affair with everybody.
Well, he had a lot of affairs and a lot of bastard children, but none of them, I believe history goes that we're pretty sure that she had one, if not two, children by him.
Yes.
But they were all illegitimate because they weren't married. Therefore, they wouldn't be able to be legitimate heirs to the throne. Everybody would contest it, blah, blah, blah. And so after a year or two or three of doing that, Henry, like he did, moved on. And that's when he eventually courted and married Anne Boleyn, who we all know as being the first one to get her head chopped off, of the two that get their heads chopped off.
Yeah.
And it's this whole thing where it's like Anne bewitched him because she said no until marriage.
Yeah, and so Alicent didn't have a
What
sister.
he can't have.
Yeah,
so Otto Hightower didn't
have.
He had no backup plan, so Alicent had to make it happen because Otto didn't have a backup daughter.
Wear your mom's dress. Our Clive brought up a good point about seizing all the church property, which was another good thing for, when you're a king who doesn't have all the money that you want, taking control of the church, getting all their assets, sure is a way to do that.
Henry did the hell out of that when he raided all the monasteries.
Yeah.
All over England after he broke from the Catholic Church and said, I'll take all of that. Thank you very much.
I mean, we definitely don't see Otto Hightower being the manipulative dad with two daughters trying to play the king. He just had Alicent. But it does seem very Boleyn to me to put in her ear, you need to make your child the successor.
Yeah.
I mean, that happened in real life as well. Mary was supposed to be the queen. She was not the first queen after anyone died. She was second after her father died. It was her brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Jane Seymour.
No,
Jane Grey.
Jane Grey, the 9-day queen.
The Jane Grey and Guildford Dudley,
poor Jane,
who were on the cusp of becoming king and queen for 9 days, and then thrown in the tower, and they had their heads chopped off. And Jane of 9 days.
There's a really
Before we get to Elizabeth.
sweet, absolutely historically inaccurate movie with Helena Bonham Carter and Carrie Elwes about Jane Grey, and it makes them look so in love when really they were apparently absolutely miserable together.
Yeah,
But,
they were politically manipulated
Yeah.
by their families.
Yeah.
but they're both very good, and it's them very, very young. It's a cute movie. Yeah, it's a cute movie that ends with a double beheading.
Well, everybody loves Romeo and Juliet, and that left a bunch of people dead.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So we had Anne, who was like, hey, you should really disinherit Mary because she's a threat to Elizabeth. And Henry was like, okay. And then after he killed Anne, he was like, fuck it, Elizabeth's out too. She's disinherited. And Jane Seymour, his third wife, was like, okay, you have a son now. I'm dying tomorrow. Maybe you should
Right.
re-inherit both of your daughters. And he sort of did, but also it was legally squicky, which is why we had our whole, so Edward became king, Jane's son, after Henry died, but that's why Lady Jane Grey was able to, be queen for 9 days, because the Catholic Church was like, no, we don't want Elizabeth, and Mary was disinherited, so maybe it's not her, and we had this kerfuffle. But then we got Mary, and then we got Elizabeth, and then we had Elizabeth the Golden Age. She was queen for a really friggin' long time. So,
Who wanted absolutely nothing to do with men because she saw what happened when women got married and gave up all their power.
Yep.
Good for her.
Kind of sounds like Rhaenyra Targaryen.
Absolutely, it does. It really does. And obviously, I don't know the rest of the story, but I could totally, I dig her vibe as just the virgin queen who just has all these lovers and doesn't ever commit to anyone. I love that for her. I hope that for her.
I did love that she was the very much brought up my mom died because of this heir situation. Yeah. Because they didn't mention this in the show, but they did a little bit where she said she tried so hard to give him an heir and it was killing her. In Fire and Blood, I forget if it's Emma or if it's one of their ancestors. They're cousins. If it's her or Viserys' mom, but she dies very, very young because she's been forced to have a child every year since she was 12. And they were like, no, she just did that too young. And this is your fault. So it's very real when Rhaenyra's like, I don't want to get married and have a kid. It killed my mom. It killed my grandma.
Damn. That sucks. But yeah.
I did see a lot of people saying it was ice cold when Viserys goes up to Rhaenys and is like, Rhaenys, you've always been my favorite cousin. And everyone was like, did you forget about your wife?
Yeah, I guess, I don't know the relationship between them. That's actually hilarious.
Yeah, I did. I'm disappointed. Any of my Twitter followers who are watching this, I'm disappointed in you because I did a poll on who Rhaenyra should marry, and you
I saw that.
Overwhelmingly voted for Daemon, her uncle. You voted for incest, you nasty people.
I mean, incest aside, we know that the best choice for her is the ever swoony Kristen Cole. He's the best. I was really surprised when I clicked Kristen Cole and he was not the winner.
I mean, she did pressure him and cause him to break his Kingsguard oath. That was another thing that made me laugh. Was so many people were like, Kristen Cole as a Kingsguard, he would never break the vow of chastity, and I was like, okay.
Have you watched how many characters have broken their oaths on this show and the previous one? The breaking of oaths is central to the storyline, to multiple storylines. It always comes back to bite you in the ass, and I am looking forward to see exactly how Kristen Cole is going to get it handed to him for breaking his oath, because it's supposed to happen. Everybody who breaks an oath gets slapped around for it, and sometimes gets murdered by a shape-changing little girl.
Oh, that's it, yeah.
Oh, the way they're making that knife a thing. Yeah, the thing with Kristen Cole, if you have read the books Game of Thrones, was very reminiscent to me of Sir Aerys Oakheart, who was a character who didn't make it in the show. He is a Kingsguard who is seduced by Arianne Martell, who also didn't make it into the show. She's the Princess of Dorne, and has a great storyline that they chose not to make because they gave us that abomination of a Dornish storyline instead. But he talks about how much, like, he wants to be with her because she's, like, the woman of his dreams, but also he's, like, the purest, most noblest Kingsguard, and he hates himself afterwards every single time, and it doesn't end well for Sir Aerys.
Yikes.
Good, it shouldn't. If it did, that's a boring story.
Yeah.
And they all lived happily ever after. Thanks, George.
And Jamie married Brienne, and everybody was happy.
Oh. I do want someone to have a happy ending, though. I just don't know who it's going to be. It's not going well for anyone. I guess there are 2 babies now. Let's see what happens. But
one of the babies might be okay.
Yeah.
Otto wanted Rhaenyra to marry one of those babies.
Oh, God.
Which is something
He's-
Targaryens have done since they came to Westeros. They have married brother to sister. And so I did like that Viserys wasn't mad about them being siblings. He was mad about Aegon being 2.
Yeah. Okay. That I remember screaming at the TV like, who cares if he's 2? That's her half brother.
Right?
Yeah, they never play that out as far as like what effects that actually has. It's just a thing Targaryens do, and everybody knows about it, and they all kind of snicker about it behind their backs. But the Targaryens continue to do it.
Well, in book lore, they did kind of go to war with the Faith over it. They also went to war with multiple wives. So when Daemon was like, "Yeah, I'll marry her and take her as a second wife," there's a lot of reasons why he should not do that. That led to many wars, not just because it's gross to us, but because that would be politically not a smooth move for Daemon.
Good perspective.
Although then we get weird stuff in, like, A Song of Ice and Fire, where in the very first episode, I think, where later time Viserys talks about how he always expected to marry Daenerys himself. So, like, giving her to Khal Drogo is like giving away his own wife. And I was like, oh, your family's gross.
Well, at the same time, there weren't a lot of Targaryens left for him to marry.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
So if he wanted to keep it in the family, he pretty much had one choice.
Or did he?
Or did he? Yeah.
Could have married Jon Snow.
That would really end the bloodline, huh?
They could adopt.
Yeah, so when I was looking up the Anarchy, I did not realize that the word anarchy was developed, like, around that period of time to describe the absolute clusterfuck that went on in British succession. So yeah, from history, it teaches us that no one wins. Nothing good comes from this. So more than ever, we need to not root for anyone. And it makes me sad because I'm rooting for the dragons. I love them so much, and I don't want any of them to get hurt. And I've read the books, and that's all I'm going to say.
Oh,
no. But the anarchy that you're referring to, it from what I've read, it's effectively, like it's the thing that happened with Mary and Elizabeth. It's what happened, what we're about to see in this show, where the king died. The king has a son. The son doesn't survive. The king has a daughter, declares that she should be the heir. Then he dies, and then all of the nobles, clash. And some of them who swore oaths and said, yeah, sure. In this case, Matilda will be the king or the queen. Mm-hmm. And then after he dies, then half of them say, no, we're taking that back, and we're going to go over here and get this other dude, the king's cousin, because got to have a guy, right? So and then there ends up being this giant, like you said, cluster of
so sad
of people politically vying against each other and deals made and people disappear and people get killed and there's, what's going to happen. And that's kind of where all of this goes. And it's happened many times throughout history. It's just the ones that we are all interested in, the fictional one on the TV show and these two particular ones that took place in England. I wonder how many times that sort of thing has happened just in England alone.
God.
I wouldn't be surprised if there were 10 or 12 very specific times that we could pick out and say, oh, here it happened again, and then it happened like every 250 years it happens.
Yeah, I mean, like the question of succession, even right now, was being questioned. Even though we already know what it is, we know that Charles is supposed to take after Elizabeth II, but I'm still seeing headlines about who's gonna succeed.
Will
like,
it be William?
Should it be William instead? Does Charles not even get a turn? I'm like, do you understand how this works?
Yeah, the media took us right down that path. I saw the chart. Like, here's Charles with a number 1 over him, and then here's the 2, and here's the 3, and here's the 4, and it went into the teens, and I'm like, this is like in the U.S. when they tell you, like, how does the Secretary of Agriculture become president? Like, everybody has to die up that list before the Secretary of Agriculture becomes president because it goes through all the cabinet members and like. Who really cares who's number 14 on that list in England, other than maybe number 14, who can just say it to his or her friends and be like, "Hey, I'm number 14 in line for the throne," as long as it's not disputed by somebody.
I've never seen the fictional adaptation of the Anarchy, but there was a show that just came out on Stars. Shoot, I forget what it's called, but it's about the young Elizabeth.
Oh yeah.
Before she became queen. It's so beautifully done. I love the lead actress, and they do such a great job of portraying how the small council can go back and forth between supporting and all of the politicking that happens. Because at one point they were like, yeah, Mary's gonna be queen. It's gonna be Mary. We're going to make sure that this little 10-year-old boy is not the king. And then they just go back and forth. At one point, they were even like, we should marry off Elizabeth, let her be strengthened, and then she can be queen too later. And then they just give up on that. It's a fantastic portrayal of how it is. And you're right, Craig, that's probably happened. Anytime there was just a slight question, all hell breaks loose because power.
Yep. And the thing that from the Tudor side of things too, to further complicate things, is the fact that Henry VIII's son, his only son, Edward IV, I believe, or maybe the 6th. He was a little ways down the Edward line. Anyway, Edward, he's very young.
Sickly and short-lived.
He's very sickly. He's never been a healthy boy. And he doesn't last very long. And then Mary takes the throne, and she's much older because she was from that first marriage way back.
It was the
but she doesn't last very long either. She gets sick and dies.
Yeah.
She has cancer or something. She has a tumor.
Yeah, she has ovarian cancer, they believe.
And then there's the whole kerfuffle with Lady Jane Grey and Guilford Dudley, and 9 days of hey, this might work out. And then Elizabeth, and then she reigns for 40 whatever years.
Mm-hmm.
And also is, we're all pretty sure, historians are pretty sure she had plenty of lovers too, including swashbuckly, cool, handsome knights like Sir Walter Raleigh. It's pretty well believed that she and Walter got it on a little bit. He founded
Sir Robert Dudley.
Came over and named Virginia after her, the Virgin Queen. So it just happens over and over and over again.
Yeah. One of the fun things with House of the Dragon that I feel like I know why they made this change. In the very first episode, when they show that big expensive shot of the whole royal family with King Jaehaerys, and it's the Council of 101 deciding who's going to be his heir, and they set it up as Jaehaerys's oldest living son, and his oldest, who is Viserys, who becomes king, and his oldest living descendant, who is Rhaenys, the queen who never was. And I get why they said that, because it's faster and you don't need all this background information. But that's not really what it is. It is. But Rhaenys is also the daughter, the granddaughter, I believe. I was looking at the family tree for a second. She's the granddaughter of his oldest daughter, kind of thing. So Jaehaerys is from his second son. So Viserys, yes. So you have Jaehaerys. He has a daughter. His daughter has kids, and then those kids have Rhaenys. Jaehaerys has a son who is the heir who dies. He has another son who is the heir who dies. And that son's son is Viserys. So at first they're like, oh, well, his daughter will be queen because she's the oldest. And then they're like, we can't have a girl be queen. And then she dies anyway. So then it becomes this whole thing of like, well, should it pass through the daughter's bloodline or should it pass through the second son's bloodline? Mm. And so then you have this whole thing where there are still people who are like, it really should have been Rhaenys. And so now we're getting to this thing where it's setting up to be this, like, it should be Rhaenyra, no, it should be Aegon fight. And then you still have people like the Baratheons, who Rhaenys' dad is a Baratheon, who are like, it should be Rhaenys. And so we're about to get 3 contenders for the throne, and spoiler alert, all of them have dragons. So we've seen generally whoever has the dragon wins, but when everybody has a dragon,
who wins? Whoever has the most dragons?
Right?
They sure do love going back up the line and then back down through a different sibling and finding people that way. And then there's all sorts of qualifiers about why they go this way or that way, and you know which line and which person that they land on is actually more viable.
I think they're all making it up anyway, because they're all married to their siblings. Like, it's just one thing.
Every so often, a Baratheon like pokes in from one side, and like put a little Baratheon blood in there, just a little.
Yeah, like in the book, Rhaenys has black hair, because her dad or her mom is a Baratheon. But I guess on the show they wanted to be like, oh no, like, we need to show everybody she's a Targaryen.
She's a Targaryen.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that gets me from Game of Thrones and this too, is like there seems to be, I guess people just don't write enough stuff down in books, and they don't tell enough stories and write enough songs, because information gets lost in relatively short period of time amongst nobility, and they're the people that get stuff recorded about them. So like the whole thing with, you know, like first season of Game of Thrones, spoiler to everybody, Ned Stark figures out that Joffrey can't be a Baratheon because he was not born brown of hair, and Baratheons all have brown hair.
Yeah.
So
medieval genetics.
Like, yeah. That happens, you know, the same thing you're talking about here, where they decide, well, we have to give this character the white hair because otherwise people get confused and not realize that she's a Targaryen.
They did the same thing with Emma, who dies too, because they call her Emma Arryn, and she's half Arryn and half Targaryen, and she has brown hair in the books. Part of the whole thing Alicent is able to like get in there is because she looks a lot like Emma Arryn, and he starts saying how much she looks like Emma. But I guess they wanted people to know, like, no, she's a Targaryen. Slap a wig on her.
But like this, what gets me is this hair color thing seems to be pretty well understood and documented amongst the people of that world.
Yeah.
Yet somehow Ned Stark discovers it. Like, how did they not realize? You know, in Game of Thrones, there's so many people that speak of dragons as these legendary things, maybe not even real, maybe just stories. There were no less than 6 active dragons 200 years ago. Only 200 years ago, 5-6 generations back.
Oh, guess what? There's going to be so many more.
But I'm just saying, like, even just what we've seen, we know that there's that many active dragons, and like for some reason, I guess they just didn't keep that information in a book somewhere. They wrote 7 pages on every damn Kingsguard, including Jamie eventually.
Including Jamie.
But they did write down a little bit about what happened with the dragons.
So, not to get too much derailed, but this goes into the fan theory, which is the Grand Maester conspiracy. That is, not only did the Maesters kill all the dragons, but they're suppressing all information about dragons and magic in general, because Maesters can't be in charge of magic and they can't be in charge of dragons, and Maesters do all the writing and they do all the reading. So that's why.
Okay. Maybe, sure.
Dang.
We don't get to have those things, but we're gonna make sure nobody else ever knows anything about them.
No one can.
And you know who Otto's best friend is? The Maester.
The Maester. Otto's character, honestly, I don't like him, but we're not supposed to like him.
Right.
But he fascinates me, and I think it might just be a typecasting thing where, you know, you get a guy that's kind of like snake looking, and you make him the snake.
That's so mean to Reese Fox.
I mean, as an actor, yes, but his character fascinates me, because in the most recent episode, when Viserys just like wisens up to this whole plot, he still even plays it off as if like he's gaslighting Viserys the whole time, and as an audience member, we're not getting any other like cues, body language or verbal cues that Viserys is right or wrong. And you kind of just have to pick a side.
Between Otto and Rhaenyra this last episode, I don't think I've ever seen two people lie so hardly when confronted with things that they actually did.
Yeah, I was like, damn, I watched that though, but I believe her.
She's like, I swear on my mother, Daemon has never touched me. I was like,
I believe you. I'm there.
Mother?
But I was wondering too, though, if she meant it as like a half truth. Like, okay, Daemon technically touched her, but they didn't
have sex.
They didn't have sex. They didn't do anything more than that. So maybe that's what she meant. She wanted to.
Parsing words.
Yeah. Is that what happened?
From a certain point of view.
I watched this last episode alone, so I didn't have my partner to like ask all the questions, even though we're both watching it for the first time together. But do you think the fact that she went back and then pulled our poor dude into the room, like, was that because like she was left hanging, or she realized what she wanted and that it wasn't with Daemon?
Ooh.
Because they've been like, my assumption was that they're close now. They've been kind of flirting for a while, like from the very first joust when she met him. You know, like, does she actually like him and thought that maybe he would be a better choice?
I think she's attracted to him, but I also think that she was very horny, and that Daemon left her hanging and was like, oh, hey, there's this hot guy who's clearly into me and is right here.
And I feel like there's an attraction between the two of them. And she came away from the whole thing with Daemon knowing that, like, if I had gone down that road, he would have had something over me that I would have had a very difficult time dealing with. And so seducing Sir Criston was her exerting power and saying, okay, like, I'm going to do this thing because I can, and because I'm reasonably sure that you're not going to hold anything over me because you've got a thing for me anyway. So she was able to make the decision to do all that sort of thing and have all the power be in her hands rather than being beholden to Daemon. If she had done something with him, she'd be on very thin ice. If she's on thin ice with just the rumor of it.
Yeah.
If it was ever proven, big problems. And so she took advantage of the situations. Like, hey, I can do this thing. I'm the princess.
And also Daemon taught her that, like, it doesn't, it sounds so gross saying this about, like, someone who clearly groomed their niece, but saying that, like, sex can be about pleasure for the woman. Like, it doesn't have to be this duty. and the fact that they juxtaposed it with Alicent, clearly miserable in her queenly duty, showing her that, it can be something that's fun and pleasurable and doesn't necessarily lead to her death or her misery. But like Craig said, because of her position, there's literally always going to be a power dynamic there with anyone except Daemon. Like, he's probably the only person, or her dad, who, like, she would not be having that level of power over them. And like she said, even accusing her is treason. Definitely sleeping with the princess is treason. And for Kingsguard, it's like a double offense. So that it was bad for Kristen to do. And
I don't know. He seemed fine. He seemed fine.
I mean,
he seemed to be okay with it.
He seemed sad, but also into it. Like, he was genuinely conflicted.
I love that they showed that, though. I love that it wasn't just like a but more of like we're taking our time and this like build up. And even when he took off the last part, or she took off the last part of his armor, and he just kind of stayed bent over for a second, that was great directing. That was great. So that probably means he's gonna die, but
or get manipulated by somebody else and have his life ruined, and who knows.
I'm really interested to see what they do with this character, because like, I know what happens in the books, but the books, if you don't know, are written as a maester compiling reports from 3 different sources. So another maester, a septon, and a jester. And the other maester is very much, he's the one who this maester says is like the most accurate. And the septon has like a very clean report, but is like, I was told this in confession. And then the jester's report is like, everybody was fucking everybody else. Daemon would take Rhaenyra away to like a dragon island and like teach her the art of pleasure kind of thing, so she could seduce Sir Criston. But the like universal consensus is that like she came on to Sir Criston, and Sir Criston was like, no, how dare, I am a Kingsguard. And then Rhaenyra left in shame, and Daemon was sent away and like banished from the kingdom. So it's really interesting. They've said that since, this is not from the 3 different perspectives, this is the perspective. But then they've also said that's not true. This is a perspective. So they've already broken with the text in that way, and I'm excited to see where things go.
I guess as a book reader who like is very excited anytime an adaptation of a book comes out and you want to see it done like the book, I kind of respect that choice creatively, because then even the people who read the book are like, what's gonna happen? And you're super excited to see every week what's going to happen. So I guess that's not so bad.
Yeah, one of the other big things was I know, at least and I think a lot of other book readers were curious about, was like, did Daemon actually say like a toast to the air for a day? And the fact that we didn't see it is still like, ooh, did he? Or did Otto just make up a lie? Or did he say it in like a sad way? Like, was there context that was removed? Because Otto's just always trying to get ahead.
I'm curious to see because like you said, what happens with Sir Criston in the books, but you don't know necessarily what's going to happen in the show. And Game of Thrones was notorious for taking multiple characters and kind of meshing them into one, and having aspects of each of these characters' storylines play out with just one character, because the cast was already really big and it's hard enough to keep track of everybody. So I find myself wondering, like, who among these is Sir Criston one of them? Might have aspects of some other peripheral character that has like this cool little arc that happens just real briefly that they want to integrate into the story, that they start to kind of bring those things into these other characters. Obviously the big movers and shakers are going to kind of have the big overall story arc, but these secondary and tertiary characters can have elements of other things going on.
I will say, keep your eye on Sir Kristen and keep your eye on the Strong brothers. We've only seen them a little bit. Sir Harwin Breakbone Strong and Laris Strong, who came down and was like, oh, I'm too feeble for the hunt. Let me eat cake with the women. And every time they said anything, we got like a reaction shot from him. Keep your eye on those boys.
Good to know.
Yeah, and Harwin Strong, when Rhaenyra came back, she was the gold cloak that she ran into when she was disguised as a boy, and he immediately recognized her. He was also the guy when she came back with the boar who was like, that's my fetish. When she was all covered in blood, making that like, yeah, face.
Okay, I didn't really register who they were. I just thought it was a random guy, but okay.
Yeah, Lionel Strong has been the one guy on the council who even when Viserys was like, oh, I assume you want me to marry her to your son. And he was like, no, I want you to do something useful. That's their dad. Got it.
Okay. I knew who he was. I think I mentioned it, but I didn't put it together. But okay.
Yeah, like that happened in Game of Thrones for me a bunch too, where like Beric Dondarrion is in the first season. He's sent off on a very pivotal quest, and then he doesn't show up again until the fourth season. And you're like, oh, that's that guy.
Well, and it took me until the second point, so it's okay.
Yeah, but the character, like that name kind of sticks with me, Dondarrion, for whatever reason. But it was just one of those things. Is like I didn't realize it until the second time I watched the show. I was like, oh, that's the guy from before.
When I first read the books, that was Roose Bolton for me. When the Red Wedding happened, I was like, who is this man? Why do I care that there's like mail under his wedding outfit? Oh my God, what is happening? And then I watched the show and I was like, oh, he's around kind of a lot. I bet they seeded him early so people aren't surprised the way I was. And then I read the books again and he's in every book. Every time they're in Rob's camp, they're like, Roose Bolton was doing this. And I was like, wow, I just really did not care about you. And the Boltons are like major players, and I was just like, I do not see it because you're not a character I like.
It's good world. It's good world building. You know, when you plan it well enough to seed that stuff in, or fly by the seat of your pants, and you just create a bunch of characters and then utilize them in interesting ways later. However you go. Just speaking from the GMing point of view, like you can do both. You can plan your characters to grow and become something, and you can just make up a bunch of characters at the beginning and then utilize them later. That's cool too.
Yeah, I know if you're going by like the plotters versus the planters in terms of writing stuff, Gurm has described himself as a planter, how he like just puts all these seeds and then is surprised how they grow. But I think the showrunners are very much plotters, where they're like, okay, George, we've seen your seeds, now here's where we need to put them.
I agree with that for sure.
Something with totally shifting gears, going back to the Tudors. Something that I always think about with Anne and Mary Boleyn, and actually Mary Queen of Scots of all people, is how they were all raised in the French court, and they always get talked about how they were trained in the arts of seduction in France. And the book Fire and Blood gets into how Rhaenyra was trained in the art of seduction by her uncle. And that's why they can do so many things that they do, because they just learned in another country. Or Rhaenyra, like, learned from the sexiest man in the kingdoms, because Daemon is supposed to be, you know, the best dude and the worst dude. He's everybody's favorite character. He has main character syndrome. And I think it's so fascinating how, you know, when you actually read about this woman, you're like, yeah, well, maybe they messed around at court, but that would be incredibly dangerous for them to do in the French court. And yeah, Rhaenyra, like, why would she do that? Why? Like, why do we attribute that to women who, oh, yes, she did something political, clearly. She seduced the men.
Yeah, I think it's always been that trope of, like, women have no power on their own. They have to take it from someone else. It has to be given to them by a man, of course. So, yeah. But, I mean, even with Mary Queen of Scots, I've heard all of that. Like, you know, she was a trained seductress. She did all the... She was promised to whatever his name was, from a child. She was there as a child, and his mother, why am I forgetting his name? The French...
Catherine of Medici?
Well, I know
Mary
Catherine de
Queen.
Medici.
Sorry, I'm all
No. The king that Mary Queen of Scots married.
Yeah, the one who
Whatever.
died.
Yes. They were very much enamored with each other.
Yeah.
From like as soon as they met, kind of. I mean, he was a shitty little kid, but like once they got into that adolescent phase where crushes developed, they liked each other, and it was his mother that she was fighting with all the time because
Francis
she was
II of France. That was
Francis,
and then she married Henry Stuart Lord Darnley, and then James Hepburn of Bothwell.
Yeah. Yes.
Mary of Guise was his mom. Also had a completely fucked up relationship with her daughter. That's a fun book to read.
Yeah, but I always think it's kind of funny to me when any writer, male, female, whatever, writes about someone being trained in the art of seduction, or even Anne Boleyn was called exotic and otherworldly because she spent 7 years in France. Like, it's next door.
And it's not even like, ooh, she spoke French, because that was the court language. Like, literally everybody spoke French.
Everybody spoke French. Okay, so she was a little bit more fashionable.
That's really what it was.
That's all it was.
She and her sister were a little bit, they styled their hair differently. Ooh.
Yeah,
she wore a doublet in the French style.
Yeah. And Mary was supposedly...
Yeah.
Mary was supposedly the beauty of the two. Anne was not that pretty. She just was confident. She had she had it.
Yeah. There was an article I read years ago that was like going through every woman in who history has described as like mysterious, and it was talking about like Cleopatra and Anne Boleyn and a couple other, I think Matahari was one, and it was like, what if they were just really funny?
Just great sense of humor.
Like, what if all the men around them couldn't handle like a woman telling jokes and being funny, and they're like, she has such a mystery. She clearly was trained in the seductive arts.
I love that.
Henry,
I've also seen like
what if Anne made him laugh?
What do you see in this Anne Boleyn? She makes me laugh.
Aww. That's so funny. I've seen the same thing kind of, and also that the combination of like really light eyes and then very dark hair and darker features was just this like, you don't have to be pretty, but you have that combination of
Prince Eric
features. Yeah. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, she's a seductress. Like, where did that come from? Truly.
Yeah. There was, that's so funny. But yes, she's used her magical wiles of having dark hair and light eyes and cracking a joke.
Oh my goodness.
And being smart and knowing what she wanted. And No. She was just sexy.
That's all it was. She was very sexy.
And also, let's flip that. It doesn't have to, like, the guy doesn't have to be the master planner. Maybe he was just really sexy too.
Yeah.
Maybe this guy, and they do it. It happens. Usually it's the king, where like, this king seduced that person, But did he seduce because he was sexy, or did he seduce because he's the king? Like, was he seductive because of his power, or was he just super handsome and knew the right thing to say? And
damn, Viserys has neither of those.
Viserys, they made him up for the show. In the book, he's like 30. But I like how they've made him like an older and competent man.
He's just this sad little artist. Every time I see him like chiseling, I'm like, oh, yeah.
I did see a lot of Warhammer posts that were like, he ignores the good political marriage and goes for what every man should. A woman who supports your gaming hobby.
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking one of the things with Anne of Cleves, who was like hideous according to Henry, and apparently it was that she was tall.
Oh my gosh, yes, I've seen that.
So hideous, just disgusting, because she was tall. And I was like, I'm glad that Henry would not be into me.
But if the show The Tudors is to be believed, Henry liked her because she played cards.
Yeah.
She was good at cards, and he felt bad for her, so he made sure to set her up. Like after he divorced her, he set her up with a stipend, basically. With alimony. She lived a nice life and everything after because that's true. She lived a nice life afterwards. Basically, Henry was only ever shown a portrait of her, and the painter made her look super pretty, which people did with portraits. Make me look as good as possible.
A giant monster woman.
Yeah, she was 2 inches too tall for Henry.
Yeah.
Well, and also, Henry originally was and this is more of a Robert Baratheon analog, if we want to tie it back to Game of Thrones, but very buff, very athletic, good at war, and just a sexy dude who just went to seed on the throne. And with Henry, it was because of a leg injury. It just started rotting. So by the time he married Anne of Cleves...
he stunk.
He smelled.
He stunk. He stunk of rotted flesh.
Yeah.
He sustained a wound during a tournament that never healed, and it was an open wound for the rest of his life. And it robbed him of his athleticism, and that's why most people know Henry VIII from that famous portrait of him being very big and chubby. For much of his life, he was thin and very fit.
Yeah, they described him as looking like a god, and that was from countries that did not like him. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just, people reporting nice things about him because he was the king. It was rival ambassadors. Chapuis, the Spanish ambassador, usually said really nasty, mean stuff about the English court. He was the one who made up the lie about Anne Boleyn having 6 fingers. And even he was okay, Henry is really, really hot.
And that's why I was always surprised that, he took an interest in Elizabeth for a little bit, but Elizabeth was so much like him.
Yes.
She wasn't some grand beauty, but she was good looking, but she was athletic. She was a great huntress, the best rider. Yeah. And everything that she took after her father naturally. It's not like he was forcing her to do all these things because that's his son and he needs to. Yeah. No, she just wanted to do these things and she was better at them than a lot of people in the court. So why he didn't just, I don't know, fall in love with her as his daughter, I don't really know, but that always confuddled me because I think every parent really wants that. Yeah.
It didn't help that she spent most of her young life living out way the hell over there.
Yeah.
Because nobody wanted her at court, so she never really got to know him. But yeah, she was described by many different people at different times as she is her father's daughter. Of all his children, she is the one that is most like him.
The flaming red hair definitely helped.
Yeah. I think Mary had red hair too, which is why it's always weird that they usually cast her with a black-haired actress because they were both redheads, I think. And so was Catherine of Aragon. She was a redhead too.
She was a redhead too. Yeah.
Mary, they cast Mary dark-haired, I think, a lot because they need to make her mean. Because ultimately she's going to be Bloody Mary. She's going to be burning Protestants at the stake. For those people not in the know, Mary Tudor, Elizabeth's older sister, was Bloody Mary because she switched the religion back to Catholicism. And started burning Protestants. Anybody who stuck by Henry's church, she just torched them. And had them killed. People. And so she became Bloody Mary. That's where Bloody Mary came from.
Henry did it the other way to Catholics. And I think Edward did too. And Elizabeth was like, hey, you know what? Let's just not. Let's stop.
It doesn't really
I'm going to focus on other things.
Yeah, Mary Queen of Scots always gets shown as a redhead. Because people are like, oh, she's Scottish. But really, she was not.
They're all redheaded.
And also, she always gets shown in movies having a Scottish accent when she really had a French accent.
She had a French accent.
She didn't even speak the language. Speaking about Henry's sores, though, what a great segue that was. Let's talk about Viserys's rotting body.
Yeah, what is it an STD? Is that what it is?
It's the throne stabbing him. So we've seen him cut his hand a couple times, but there's this theme that the throne decides who is and isn't worthy.
Mad King is not.
Yeah, Mad King Aerys was covered in so many cuts they called him King Scab. Maegor the Cruel was notoriously always injured by the throne and actually found run through by one of the swords that is on the throne. So people said, like, the throne deemed him unworthy as a usurper and killed him. It's also very likely that, like, literally anyone in court just killed him and then was like, yes, the sword is definitely part of the throne. But yeah, how we feeling about the idea of the throne making him unworthy, and also tying that to Henry VIII, and, you know, poor Alicent Hightower.
I like that it's taking its time with him. Like he could redeem himself. Like, yes, it's getting worse, but it's not running him through. At least.
True.
Like, he has all of these. Obviously, there's the very controversial to his court decision of making his daughter his successor and not his son once his son is born. And we, as a viewer who's never read the book, don't even know the gender of the new baby yet. So
just a baby.
Whatever. Just a baby.
The second baby.
So I mean, if they're gonna use that as like an element to the story, like, you know, he's not gonna die just yet. He's just gonna keep getting sicker and sicker unless he decides to give up his throne or he dies elsewhere. Then he'll get better because he's not supposed to be there. Because I still think the queen that
never was, Rhaenys.
Never was. She should have been chosen, honestly.
I love her to pieces.
Yeah.
I love her just, like, in the first 2 episodes when she's just, like, watching over everything and kind of sassing to her husband on occasion.
Yeah. Even the conversation that she had with Rhaenyra, I was like, she's telling you some truth, girl. Put your pride aside and listen.
I saw so many people who were like, "Ooh, she's so mean," giving her that, like, Hillary Clinton energy. Like, I'm not getting rid of your student loans because I had to pay them. And I was like, that is not what's happening.
That's not.
She's like, learn from my life. I've been here. I've lived this. I'm trying to help you.
Yeah. I think my first instinct was to, like, hate her because I don't like it when people older than me talk about me like that or try to tell me things about my situation. But, like, whenever you take a step back and you think about they've been here before, then it sits in.
Rhaenyra just had such teenage sass in that too, where she's like, it's not that they didn't pick a woman, they just didn't want you. I was like, oh, what a bitch.
Rhaenyra, I'm trying to root for you.
It was so something I would have said when I was like 15 though too.
I would still probably say it now just because I'm going to be petty and bitter in that moment, but I would say sorry later.
Oh, yeah. I saw a couple of people who were theorizing that, like, the way we saw the little boo-boo on Viserys' finger, and then it kind of grew into, like, a rotting finger, and now we've seen that he's missing 2 fingers and has, like, the sores up his arm, and they were like, oh, maybe it's because he's slow to react to things. So, like, if he just cut off that finger when it first started rotting, maybe he would have both fingers, and it's, like, representative of how, like, he needs to actually do things faster, like, do something about Daemon faster, do something about Rhaenyra faster, and he just kind of wants everybody to like him, so he lets things play out, and it's literally killing him.
Yeah, it'll be fine. just give it a little time. Rub some dirt on it. Put a little lotion on there.
God.
2 fingers later.
Yeah, it was like all of his back too. Yeah.
Because he leans into that throne of swords.
So it's just like tetanus taking him out.
I guess. There's some people who are like, it's the maester killing him, but I honestly think maybe the maester's just not good at healing. And, you know, if you're constantly getting cut every day and don't have good medication. We saw Khal Drogo died from a boo-boo that he didn't take care of.
I'm not convinced the maesters actually know that much science. So, you know, yeah, probably they're just not doing what they need to do because they don't actually know how. So they're like, let's put this stuff on there. Let's put that stuff on there. It worked for this person. Well, that person just got lucky. You know, like some other things went well for them, and that's why it wasn't the unguent or the salve that you put on there. It was like they ate healthy and they kept it clean, and you just didn't account for that.
I mean, the maggots were a good idea.
They bandaged it.
Yeah, still use those. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did
Get rid
have
of the
that
dead flesh.
moment, I think, in the first episode when the Grand Maester was like, I don't know, we could do this. And then the younger Maester's like, or we could cauterize it. And he's like, I had a clever idea. We could cauterize it. And I was like,
What? Yeah.
oh, okay, so you're just old and you don't know the new techniques like cauterization.
Well, then that makes me worried
Yeah,
for Rhaenyra, because isn't the Maester the one who gave her that
Sure is.
tea? I hope she doesn't drink it then. I mean...
The moon tea. The abortifacient.
Well, the question also becomes, what else does the tea do? Does it like, if it makes you sick and she doesn't get sick, then people are going to know something. If it makes her sweat a lot, and she doesn't suddenly start sweating a lot the next day, people are going to know she didn't take it.
Yeah. Well, also, they would just
That's
know
the
she
thing.
didn't
If
take
I was
it.
her, that's what I would be worried about. Like, if I don't take this, how are they going to be able to tell? Like, is there something else? Is there something more that I don't know?
I think I just, for the first time ever, no, not the first time ever, there were a couple episodes in Game of Thrones where I was so in shock at the end that I watched the subtitles go by and listened to the music. And that episode, I did that for the first time this season. I was just like thinking, what choice can she make? Which one is the choice? What's the better choice? So I really do love that they did that. I'm probably going to rewatch it tonight because my partner's here.
Yeah, so they've had moon tea. It's like featured a lot in the books. It's something that Lysa Arryn, Catelyn's sister, was known to have used in her youth, and it was brewed improperly and led to her having a lot of miscarriages down the line, and is partially why her son is that boy that we know and love, Sweet Robin, as all in all his mess.
Bless his heart.
Right? Bless him. But yeah, a lot of people use moon tea. They even talk about how Robb Stark's wife, who's still alive in the books, used it like every night that she was married to him, because her mom was like, you don't want to have his baby because they'll kill you if he loses this war, kind of thing. So it's nice to see it in the show. I wonder if her dad actually sent it. If her dad was like, I know that you're lying, have some of this. Or
I
if
think
it's like Otto.
I feel like it's Otto.
It's Otto. Mm-hmm. He's
Or if
trying
it
to
was
redeem
Alicent.
himself, or... Oh.
It could be anybody.
It could be Alicent. I just, in the moment, it feels like something that Otto would have arranged, because he doesn't have much time to do much of anything.
And the Maester's
Because
his bestie.
he's about to get, like if he's still hanging around in the same parts of the castle, the Red Keep, tomorrow, there's going to be trouble, because he's been ousted. So he had to he had to just do something quickly to try to swing something in his favor so that he would have something to bargain with, maybe, I guess. Or for all we know, it was one of those strong guys, or the Alicent, or Joe Schmo. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, how long did it take before we learned, in Game of Thrones, how long did it take before we learned what the Queen of Thorns did?
Yeah.
They had us.
That's 2 seasons?
They took a few.
We still don't really know in the
3
books. We know what Peter told Sansa, but yet Peter is known for his truth telling.
Yeah.
Well, that's on George, because he's hasn't been writing. But the story, as the story goes in the TV show, like we learn, like you said, it's seasons later where we learn what actually happened.
We don't know from Game of Thrones, the show, who sent the fucking cat's paw to stab Bran.
Not definitively, no.
I don't think the show ever answered that, which is funny, because they're making such a big deal about that dagger in House of the Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
They,
in the book, it was Joffrey who did it, but the show just it
well,
was
we're
such a big
we're
deal
led to,
that we just dropped that plot.
Aren't we led to believe, at least sort of in passing, that it was ultimately Littlefinger?
Maybe.
Yeah. And whether or not that's the case in the book, or will it be revealed in the book, I don't know. But at the same time, they spent a lot of time in the TV show, making sure that Littlefinger was involved in some way in damn near everything that happened.
Yeah.
So that when he does get it, it's so well deserved. Because like he's got his hand in darn near every major plot.
Yeah.
In that show.
I wish he.
Which is what makes him a great character, because he's not a noble, he's not a knight, he's just some guy that worked his way up the ladder, and did all of these things and manipulated like
everybody.
Look at me, just dance, puppets dance, and then I pushed it one step too far with this one Sansa.
Damn, I was taken down by a psychic tree boy.
I do like the position of like hand to the king a lot. It reminds me of Lord Protector, well, what they would call a Lord Protector in the Tudor era, who was just like the hand to the king, because they always overreach, they always overstep, and they get yelled at, or they get killed, or things get taken away from them. So I mean, I know we're not supposed to like Otto, and we don't, but it was very cathartic to watch even a dumbass like Viserys hand Otto's ass to him.
Was there ever anything colder than him just like doink with that little pin removing it?
Yeah.
It was so nice. So nice. But I like that parallel at least a lot between like even with Edward VI when he was king, and the Lord Protector, the two that he had overreached constantly.
Oh, yeah.
And they were the ones who were instigating these battles of succession. Like, who should it be? Who are we supporting? Because at the end, they supported Elizabeth, but Mary had the power. So they just let her after Jane Grey was beheaded.
Yeah.
I found myself thinking a lot of secretaries of state when it comes to the Hand of the King character. But Lord Protector, that's a good call. That fits there well, because the Lord Protector usually has a more personal relationship with the monarch, whereas the Secretary of State is more concerned with the state and how the kingdom is being dealt with. Although I'm a big fan of Francis Walsingham under Elizabeth in his spy network, and I don't know that he ever used children. But he was Elizabeth's Master of Whispers, in addition to being the Secretary of State. If you ever get a chance, go, if you want to dig up some of the other peripheral characters around the nobility.
He was like the first spy master, as we like.
He was
today.
Ridiculously, like, he was so well connected. He had spies in every court in Europe. By the time he was done, and it helped that he was best buddies with Cecil, the treasurer, and so he could get the money to do whatever he needed to do. And it was during Elizabeth's reign, which was very profitable, where the crown was very rich. So that all sort of helped a great deal. But it's sometimes those political positions adjacent to the king or queen are really interesting to check out too.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting time in House of the Dragon, because we don't have a Master of Whispers, and we're kind of seeing that when Otto gets the message from Little Kid. It's like shades of what will eventually become the Master of Whispers position, which I thought was fun, and seeding it with like a message from the White Worm, and you see it's Daemon's old former paramour. I liked where that's going.
I find myself wondering if the Targaryen dynasty didn't concern itself too much with the Master of Whispers, because they think that they're so noble and royal and descended from old Valyria, and like, we don't need that. We can handle anything that comes along. We have dragons. We don't need to spy on everybody else. We can handle our business. Whereas other houses don't necessarily think they've got that in their pocket all the time.
I think that's a really good idea, actually, because they happen like we have the blood of the dragon, and we all marry each other, and who would stop us? We'll just light them on fire.
This is kind of off kilter just a little bit, I don't know why. I think it's just a thing for me because it's such an epic moment in Game of Thrones when Dany emerges from the fire unscathed. She's got dragons. And we've seen in the show Viserys untouched by fire, but I don't think that we've actually seen Rhaenyra do that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's assumed that she has this ability as well, but I personally have just kind of been waiting to see it. Is it going to be some epic moment, or is it going to be like a small thing? Like, I thought she was going to grab the hot end of the dagger, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
And then, like, she, her dad kind of scared her, but but I am waiting on that. I don't know. It's just maybe like a weird little thing that I like, but I'm excited to see that.
I agree. I feel like they're waiting for the big moment. They've hinted at it. They've reminded us, right? They've reminded. But remember, Targaryens are okay with fire, and in the last or second to last episode of the season, there'll be something, some big moment with her or her and somebody else, or who knows.
Though in the books, they're not. So many Targaryens die by lighting themselves on fire. It's like funny.
Yeah, I thought even in the show, was it not established that Dany's brother didn't have that ability?
She says it about him when the melted gold is on his head. Yeah, and George I'm calling him George like I know him. Mr. Martin.
I do too.
Has said like, yeah, that's not a Targaryen thing. Dany didn't burn because of like the magic that was happening, like the blood magic. It's not a special Targaryen ability. But
well,
it is part of the show universe, and House of the Dragon seems to be like kind of threading a needle between book and show universe. They're definitely closer to the text and bringing in a lot more prophecy, which was very important in the books. And the previous show was like, we don't want to deal with prophecy.
We'll throw prophecy out there, but we'll kind of ignore it.
Right. So I will, and I know George is very involved in this show, way more than he was in especially later seasons of Game of Thrones. So I'm interested to see if they bring back some of that fire resistance. Because, you hear about Targaryens who died by being, like, blasted by dragon breath, died trying to turn into a dragon by drinking wildfire, died trying to hatch a dragon by lighting their house on fire, and all sorts of just poorly conceived things.
Wow. I mean, I guess if I thought it ran in my bloodline, I might try something, but it would probably be with a candle and not like wildfire.
Well, no. It makes me feel like at some point it must have happened.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just a story. Maybe it's that people are willing to risk their lives on the story. But I feel like, it must have happened. Like there must be a pretty good accounting of like with at least a few Targaryens in the past through the ages did have that ability. And so every Targaryen who thinks they are truly worthy is willing to, like you said, drink liquid grenade or step in front of a dragon or jump into a fire pit.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, if anything, that we've learned from the books and the show is that listening to a prophecy is not a good idea. It never goes the way you expect it to. Because the prophecies are true, but they never come true in the way you'll expect. And pretty much any time someone is like, yes, this is happening, that's not happening. Something else is happening. And that's why we don't get POV from Littlefinger and from Varys, because if they said this is happening, that probably would be happening. They're the only ones who know what's going on. Well, thanks for joining me to talk about this. Do we have any final thoughts on Tudor connections in House of the Dragon?
I'm not sure where Grimm gets a lot of his inspiration from. He's an author, so probably other texts. But if he's drawing inspiration from history, I don't blame him because the Tudors are fucking juicy. So, I mean, with this in mind, I'm going to keep watching the rest of the season thinking about that. But I guess I'm glad I watched it. I wasn't going to watch it just because I wasn't.
I made you watch it?
Yeah, a little bit. But I like it. So I'm gonna rewatch the episode 4 right now, and yeah.
And Riley, thank you for the follow, and Crackety, thank you for the subs. um, Craig, any final thoughts?
I have to watch the Tudors again. Like now I want to go back and watch the Tudors for, I think it'll be the third time. I think I've only watched it twice before, but
I wish they had made Jonathan Rhys-Meyers get like just gross Henry for later seasons. That was my biggest
they
disappointment.
put a little padding on him at the end, but he never got really big.
You know how some actors are like, I'm not allowed to lose in fights on screen? I don't think he would have allowed them to make him ugly.
Because like, I must always be sexy.
And
I will have a wound that we will see 2 times and we will refer to 3 additional times, but that is all. That is all I will stand. Because that's about how often it happens on the show. It's just brought up occasionally, even though it's like a huge part of his life.
Yeah, as was impotency, but they don't show that a lot.
Yeah, well, nobody wants to see Jonathan Rhys-Meyers be like, "Oh, sorry."
We've been watching Matt Smith deal with impotency all season.
Yeah, but you know, he's
reacting
legendary.
with anger.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I think there's a Tudors rewatch in the future for me.
Fun. Well, yeah, my final thought is I'm just so glad that you came to talk about this with me. I know this was kind of a disorganized conversation, but I loved having you both on. So let's go this way first. Craig, where can we find you?
Oh, I'm at Nerdburger Craig on Twitter. If you pop in there, you'll see that there's a Kickstarter coming up, which is for kind of a big deal for a game called Code Warriors. So you can dig up information via that, and there's links to preview information and a way to follow the project and all that fun stuff. So there you go.
Heck yeah. Chris, where can we find you?
You can find me mostly on Twitter at Carpe Christie. I'm in a couple of projects right now, things that I can and can't talk about. So as soon as I can, I will be talking about them nonstop on Twitter because I'm very excited and very honored. One thing I can say is that in a little bit, you'll see my interview with Women of D&D coming out, and I'm just very honored that they reached out to me to do that because I thought I was a nobody, but apparently I have things to say, and you get to see them.
Oh, that's awesome. Congrats.
Cool. Thank you.
I just realized I was wondering why none of my bots were running, and it's because I turned them off because I'm a goofus. So, hey.
Oh, no.
Go buy some coffee, everybody. Yeah, and I'm Jess. You know who I am because that's how you found me. But you can find me here tomorrow at this time, half an hour earlier than now, at 8 p.m. Eastern tomorrow for Three Flings. We are playing part 2 of When Luck Runs Out. And we're not this Sunday because we're taking time off from that stream. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It was lovely to have Christiana and Craig here. And thank all of you for stopping by. This was a blast, and I will let you know if we ever do this again. Stick around because we are going to raid somebody that I will determine. Let's go raid Trooper SJP. Let's do that. That sounds fun. So give them some love when we get there, and until then, have a great night or day, whatever time it is for you. Bye, y'all.
Bye.